always loved architecture, and in a way, something about architecture that is not really easy to teach or to learn or to practice, which is space. The true and first real construction material that architecture and architects have to deal with is space. Is basically what is not there, not really the construction, but what is not constructed. Many years went by before I was able to work somewhat with architecture again, until during a short tenure in a creative writing school, I was asked to propose a course that would deal with the literature, but not from a literary point of view, because I am not a writer or anything like that. And so I told the people who ran this course, I always realized that architectural metaphors are very useful in describing literary texts, from the architecture of a novel onward. And I always felt, when I was reading a novel or a well-written short story or something like that, that there was always a moment that I would realize, by pausing, that I was kind of inhabiting not so much all of the descriptions and the settings of a story, but I was following a path that was the architecture built around me of the story itself. Narrative follows some kind of principles, I believe, and then I've been learning via this course, that are not far away from the principles of composition in architecture. And so I told the students, you want to be writers, you must love one or more books. Bring one. Tell me about the book in structural terms or in emotional terms, why that book works and why it's not any other book. So strip it of all of the words, like a tree, shake it, all of the leaves fall off and you see the structure of the tree. Do the same with the book. Tell me about the book so that we can extract some kind of essence, structural essence that is not made of words. Because I do think that we often, we are able to think without words, and it's not very easy, but it is possible. And so the results were amazing and very surprising, because after all these years, I believe, and it's actually very common, that people who write a lot, read a lot, who deal with literature a lot, have an inner, almost wired-in sense of engineering, of construction. If you write, if you do writing exercise, or if you read a lot, you know that certain elements of a story need to be there, need to be told in a certain way and not in another one. And if you change these elements, if you move them around, like in a composition, you change the story. For example, in architecture, there has always been the idea that a dark space with light coming from the end of this hall means something from a spiritual point of view or whatever. In reality, it's how we perceive space. And that very idea has been, described with different languages in 2,000 years of architectural tradition. And the languages depended on culture, on eras, on construction technologies. And in fact, Tadamando, recently built a church with the very same principle, but with a completely different idea of material and minimalism. And the same goes, I believe, with stories. Stories are probably initially conceived very minimalistically in a way that, for example, I don't know, he likes her, but she likes somebody else, and he gets very upset and maybe he tries to kill himself or kill him. I don't know. This has happened dozens of times in these past several centuries, but every time it has been told with a language that was connected with the context of time and culture and language, etc. And so these simple ideas brought forward the fact that designing a piece of architecture, a structure that is connected to my interpretation of a text, after the initial fear panic, terror. The reaction has been of this kind, more or less, but always very much so. Is something that you are all going to be very good at, because there is no wrong or right in this exercise. There is no mistake, except that in some instances you'll see how, when you work with your colleagues, that the initial desire is usually to be kind of literal in the transferring into a spatial and structural idea, something that comes from a story. So often you'll feel like maybe designing settings, designing something in a literal way. Good is up, bad is down. I suffer and therefore something is small. But you have to think about your own experience with architecture, which you're having right now, which you have had this morning when you left your home, and you have every day wherever you go. Architecture is our daily occupation. We take in space, we perceive space even when we don't look at it. And that's why the magic of architecture is given by the constant absorption of this strange thing. And I talk a lot with my accent, so I apologize if I went too far or too long. Usually I show images of pieces of architecture that go from a very simple hut or cave. And imagine if that were to be a story, it would be a very simple story. You go in, protect yourself from the elements, and then go back out. And if you add a door, if you add a window, if you add a canopy, if you build a temple, if you have 6 layers of columns before you get to the core of the temple, if you have a huge building and you have to go up 50 flights of stairs rather than one, what does it mean in terms of literary idea of space? If it's hard to get to a point, if it's difficult to see something, if it's instantaneous, the possibility of reading a space because it's very bright or it's very dark, what does it mean and how could it be translated into a story? Your exercise is exactly the opposite. You will know Catcher in the Rye so well that you will choose an aspect of the novel that you want to explore. Holden's relationship with his being the age that he is, with adults, with his inner self, or his sense of being, sure of himself, or the opposite of that, etc., etc. Or the way the story is told, his relationship with the city. There are many elements that you will probably learn about or extract, but just a few will be the essential ones that you will not want to miss in your project. Any questions of any kind from any of you? John, did I miss to say something, you think?
I don't think so. I'm sorry, I'm up there. I think that one of the challenges, like we talked about yesterday, is that this seems very abstract, and it is an abstract exercise, but it becomes very practical, and so I don't know. Maybe you spoke a little bit about that, addressing that fear, but maybe we can expand on that a little bit. That fear.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if what has been the reaction among all. Have you been doing some thinking, sketching, or drawing, or is it complete fear or paralysis? Are you all frozen, or yes? If you don't say anything, it means yes. Okay, let's do.
So,
if you make noise, it's no.
Do you guys feel like you're stuck? You don't know what to do? Like you don't know where to go from this? We haven't done any sketching yet. We're going to start doing that today. But how do you guys feel about it so far? Feedback. Yeah, Juliet.
I just don't think I know enough about my own individual experience with the book because I haven't finished it yet.
Right.
To know what the complete journey is.
Right. So we are finishing the book the next 2 days of class. So we'll have it done by Friday this week. So Juliet just expressed that she's not entirely sure what to think yet because, of course, she hasn't quite finished the story. So, of course, that whole narrative arc has to be completed. So that's part of the process. And what else? What are some other struggles that you guys are having? Yeah?
I'd say it's just kind of hard to like start out. Like I understand what's going on and like I understand the project and everything, but it's like like figuring out where to start with like the whole project itself is kind of tricky.
So where to start? Okay. So an issue.
Where to start with anything in life is a disaster. So finishing the story is obviously, I mean, I didn't say, but it's the essential. Meaning, you at the end of this first act of the process, and before you begin, you will have to be, mini experts on Catcher in the Rye. Experts means that you have absorbed it as your own book, your own experience. Another thing that I often talk about is that architecture and literature have one other aspect that it goes beyond the two disciplines that intersect one another, but they overlap completely. You can theoretically know so much about a given famous piece of architecture. I have images of the Pantheon in Rome. You can imagine, think of any other you like. I don't know, in San Francisco. I don't know. Just picture any in your mind, and I can show you photographs of that piece of architecture. I can tell you who designed it. I can tell you why it's important, and blah 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 blah. I can show you drawings, but the only moment when you will really understand what the space is about, what the architecture is about, is when you'll be able to walk into it and take in the space again, what is not there. So you walk into the Pantheon, for example. You know what the Pantheon is, famous temple standing up from 2,000 plus years ago. And I had seen it many times in photographs and drawings, but nobody ever was able to tell me that it's huge. And it doesn't look huge, because huge is a relative term, and the architecture is all relative to the way I experienced it. So you walk through the first set of columns, and these columns are not just columns, they are massive, tall, like redwood forest kind of pieces of marble, and you feel teeny. Then you go through a door that is big but red beside. And then you enter a space that is half of a sphere, totally empty, with a hole on the top. And the hole sucks your neck kind of upward because everything is empty, everything is hollow and huge, and the emptiness of the opening on the top sucks you up. This experience is what makes you understand what the Pantheon is about. Literature, a book, is not far from this. You've heard about Catcher in the Rye before. You've been told who wrote it and why and when and blah blah blah. But now you are having the experience of taking it all in, of understanding how it works, of hearing its voice and the language, and you're inhabiting this structure that is the structure of a book. So you know exactly the end of the process of reading the book, what it felt like to you. What kind of work it was, what kind of structure, if it's structure that you want to focus on, what kind of voice, what kind of feeling that book gave you. And this is the beginning. And this is the beginning when you sit down with your friend, because you've been working in tools, I believe, and talk to John and start to discuss the book. Why you liked the book, why you didn't, what was the most important element, what you found the most interesting, was the thing that makes it Catcher in the Rye and nothing else. And you talk about it, and you write down all of the elements, the emotions, and the sense of loneliness. I'm throwing things out there that have nothing to do with the book, maybe, because I don't want to also suggest it. So the sense of loneliness, fear, detachment, chronology that is strange, the past, remembering things, or these are all elements that often, come out when we talk about books during the books. And these elements and these words, these feelings, these ideas, begin to, inhabit your mind and your piece of paper. And then you start to think, what could any of these things be if they were architecture? A big room, completely lit with a lot of immense windows conveys a sense of maybe clarity, or maybe I'm very small, or maybe the opposite of intimacy, etc. So I want to do the opposite. I want to do the opposite, so I work on the proportions of a big space. I don't want one big space, because the story is told in various moments. I don't discover everything instantaneously, but I need time. If you need time, architecture gives you time, because it takes time to explore the next space, the next big space, or the next small space. It's difficult to give you examples when I'm speaking in very general terms, because you will realize that you have to focus on ideas about the book that seem to be very abstract now, but they will turn out to be extremely concrete and practical. If I could imagine that we would be talking after Friday, I could listen to you describe the book and see you starting to wonder or imagine architecture that makes you feel the way that Holden, as an element. Imagine Holden being a character of your piece of architecture, a building, a thing, a space. He's going to have a relationship with somebody else, with the adults, with his idea of himself, with some of this stuff. How does it work? Does it work, does it work like this? Does it work like this? Is it something that overlaps in a certain way? Any of these ideas will work. And I'm afraid I've confused you more. Have I? Yes, silence. No, I see on the left. Did any of these make sense? You can move your hands and I can show you.
Yeah.
Some kind of sense? Yes. I see a hand. I see, yes.
Earlier you said the cave is a simple story, but if you have a bigger architect or whatever, bigger building and a more complex building, would that make the story or character more complex?
The simple answer is yes. Stories are even you think of stories. There was a time when stories didn't exist. There must have been, but then there was a time when stories began to exist, and it actually is the same. There was a time when all you needed was some place safe where to spend the night, so you wouldn't be attacked by a predator. Then there was a moment when you began to construct the place rather than look for it. And that means that you started to add language to the same kind of story. I need a safe place where I can sleep. And if you move forward very quickly to this spatial story, which is just, I need a safe place, and then it becomes, I need a safe place where I can stay and spend, where I can lock myself in, where I can look out from a window, the idea of a window, a frame from which you see the world where you were before. Everything changes. And the story, in this case that I'm talking about, is a spatial story. But stories might have gone through a similar kind of evolutionary path. So somebody comes back from a search session to look for prey, and he has to tell you where they are. That is a relaying of a kind of story. But then these can, begin to become more complex, because maybe you begin to explain things that you don't understand and you embellish them. Stories become more and more articulated. And architecture can be seen as a similar way to describe narrative. I have talked to many writers. Yesterday somebody asked me, but is any book made of some kind of structure? Which was an interesting question, because when I realized that the people who write have to constantly look at their work in terms of structure, this piece doesn't make sense here, I'll move it over there, or I'm talking about a guy who all of a sudden remembers something in the past, and so a story comes in from the past, and this is an architectural choice. I did realize that many writers do design, often, in two dimensions, often sketching, series of events and characters. So this happens. So maybe just simply, first thing, then second, and third, and fourth, and then there is something else happens. This is another character, another event, whatever. Things are kind of plotted in a way that makes sense. The strange aspect of this experiment is that by turning everything into three dimensions, you can actually look at the relationships between the various characters or the various elements, the various moments in the story in much more depth, because words do disappear, and you realize if this, again, I take the cell phone and the checkbook, if the fact that these two are of different height, because they're two different moments, two different things that happen, two events, two characters, I don't know, is this relationship the right relationship? Or should it be more like this, or even like this? And your answer will be the correct answer if you know why you're saying that. So, again, the easy and quick answer was yes, because stories can be more or less complex, but it will be up to you and your interpretation of the story you are building, in this case, Catching Your Eye, to turn it into something that is meaningful to you. So you recognize exactly why you did all the things you did.
Okay. Do you have any other questions, please?
I saw another hand before, together with his. Somebody else, maybe here.
Ned, speak loudly.
Okay, so using a character like Holden to build some architectural structure around, I was finding it, when I was trying to think of ideas to build, kind of hard to do because Holden is a phony character. He has kind of a lot of fraud in the way he goes about things and what he thinks, because he's constantly trying to make people like him. And I was wondering how you think you'd go about that.
Engaging in a conversation, because you already said there are some elements of if I take what you've said very quickly and try to work with it, then time then makes you wonder if what you're saying is actually the case and wonder blah blah blah. But you said phony. There is architecture that presents itself in a way that then does not match the reality. There is a lot of architecture that you can imagine, even if you don't know which one it is, even if you don't know history of anything. But imagine a place that has a kind of resemblance, maybe on the outside, and a totally different feeling on the inside. Okay, this is already a very first, almost literal way to react to what you're saying, because I am imagining that your intuition now and what you're saying about Catching the Eye is absolutely correct because it's yours. Who am I to say, no, Holden is actually this or that? This is your interpretation, this is your literal interpretation. So let's think about a way that architecture can actually replicate this intuition that you just described to me. So, what is different between the phoniness you're talking about? I would be asking you if we have the time now to talk about is exterior, is interior, is what I see is not what happens inside, or is it something else? Meaning you are now in an area of the look of something is not reflected by its inner work. Am I correct by giving the summary? From a section, like I said, okay. So if you see, I'm talking about what you just said from an architectural point of view, and it's overlapping your literary interpretation. So now we would be working, if I were there, in finding something that makes sense for you in terms of architecture. So you're walking down the street, you see a building that is very stark. It seems to have absolutely no openings. It's like a block of marble or ice, and it's very strong in terms of reflection. When you see something that doesn't have openings, you think of it as tough. Then you go closer and you realize that maybe the toughness is not really tough because this entire structure is not marble, is not a painted wall, but maybe it's a kind of mesh. So the mesh, the closer you go, makes you see inside something that is totally different. You know, a very soft, many floors. I don't know, because not knowing is part of this process, but the closer you get, the more you realize that the seeming harshness of the volumes has no corresponding element inside. And maybe, I'm not you, would we be going in the right direction for you to convey what you're thinking about the book? And this is the core of the process. And maybe we completely off, maybe I'm partially right, but this is how it would work.
Yeah.
Wondering how we can, in terms of architecture, convey what you just said. And if we are more or less in the ballpark, we start to sketch. You start to take a piece of cardboard and punch holes into the cardboard, or buy some kind of mesh or piece of fabric, some store, and try to build a volume that looks from far away something very, again, solid, but it's not. And you wonder, is this the whole that I'm thinking of, the phoniness? Or should it be the other way around? Should it be a soft outside and then the hard, tough core inside? And we start to imagine. Does this?
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
That's
Yeah.
good. It's not easy from far away, and it's not easy by not having a chance to talk to each of you or each group, 20 minutes one-on-one. You tell me your interpretation, like you did right now, of the book. I believe that, Holden is a funny guy because there is all of this facade, and then the inner inside is completely different. And I would ask you, but what do you mean? Is it tough on the outside? Is it mushy on the inside? Or what kind of phoniness are we talking about? Then the word is phoniness. Phoniness becomes our word for the moment. And what could it mean in terms of architecture? What would you feel if you saw a building that is like A, as I said before, and then it becomes B, or should it be the opposite? And you tell me what you think, because you know architecture as much as I do and as much as anybody else, because you see it every single day of your life. Because there are architects or archistars who build all the time, doesn't mean that we, the users, are not as expert as they are, because we take it in every day. So you are now literary experts because you've read a book that you know very well and you know so much about it. And what you're trying to do first is to give me a description the way you did. And what is your name?
Ned.
Ned?
Ned.
That you just gave me, and we became with some almost tangible element, and then off we go. We go looking for. Sometimes maybe it's just a hole in the ground. A hole is a place that is not a place, because people tend to be drawn by holes just to see what's in it, and if you don't see the bottom, you get all disturbed. And why? I don't know, or it's obvious, doesn't matter. But there are so many things that surround us in terms of architecture. Even your wavy courtyard, wavy on one side versus tough and windowed on the other when I saw these two photos, and this is all I remember. But there is already a message. It's one side all wavy and smooth, and the other one is tough. There are maybe practical explanations, but there are also narrative ones that we can attach to that.
How about one final question, and then we'll let him go. Isabel?
What process do you use to help you start designing a new building?
I believe I couldn't hear you.
I'll repeat it. What process do you use when you start to design a new building? Right? That's what you asked.
During the laboratory, you mean?
In the laboratory?
Yeah.
Yes.
The process. Yeah, I mean it's it's disastrous. Meaning there is no process. Relax. This is a game. It's like if somebody asked you, some of you maybe play baseball. What is Brazil about to hit a double? I practice. I don't know. I hope for the best. Meaning, it's difficult to give a recipe. What I just shown you with this exchange that is that you talk to each other and try to focus or take out of the book some things, elements, opinions, ideas, feelings that are clear, that you feel strongly about. You will have to negotiate these things with your colleague, which is actually a good thing to do because you have to reinforce your own intuitions and ideas and maybe be convinced by the others. And then the first step is imagine what kind of architectural building element idea could match your intuition. And the sense of being lost, often labyrinths come by and then we move away from them, but the sense of not knowing where you are, so curved walls give you much less points of reference and orientation versus clear cut angles. Nicely curvy buildings attract everybody's attention. You look at them, think of a Frank Gehry building more than another one, but maybe seemingly very clean, very, very predictable piece of architecture can hide many more surprises than a Frank Gehry firework kind of explosive architecture. Because once you're overwhelmed by the explosiveness of something flashy, it's hard then to focus on other things. If you see the Seagram building in New York City, probably the first skyscraper built in a certain way, you think that it's like any other in any other downtown part of any city in the United States, but then if you pay attention, you realize that it's incredible. And what is it incredible? I don't know. You can go and see it by yourself. It requires another kind of attention. And these are in two different directions you can take. In architecture that clearly states something right away. Imagine, a piece of land and a big block suspended and tilted with teeny columns. That attracts attention. That already is a statement. If the same building is a cube and is leaning on the ground like all of the others, then you'll think of it as a predictable kind of piece of architecture. But then you go in and you realize that the inside is totally empty, as we were talking about before. You have to let your imagination go. Don't use any of your luggage, architectural luggage, such as windows, bow windows, A-shapes, roofs. I don't know. Don't worry about all this stuff. Just think of space, walls, openings, light, darkness, maybe colors, maybe reflections, water reflects. Very pure elements.
Okay.
Silence.
Is there time for one more question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You ask me, John?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Mackenzie, did you want
I
to?
have the same question.
Okay. Anyone else have a question you want to ask? One last question to kind of send them off before we launch into this.
Did I miss something from? No, I think I.
You covered everything, I think. Pretty sure.
We covered too much, maybe.
No, actually, this was a very helpful time. Anybody else? Any other ideas? Okay, so we're going.
Show me your ideas when you have them, via John. Show me the very simple ideas, like the one we just talked. Phoniness. What is phoniness in terms of architecture? Come up with all of these intuitions of yours that are the synthesis of your reading of a book. The ultimate product will be something that is going to be made of proportions, etc., but no words. So how can you explain a book? By showing a model. That's the seemingly impossible or absurd challenge, but you realize how much sense this would make. I'm very curious to see what we come up with, and it's very. I'm excited from this side of the ocean, so I hope you are going to be at least a little somewhat excited. Okay.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So we'll chat later, and thank you so much for your help today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
So, what time is it? What is this?
6, almost 7. Ugh. That's 7:30.
Okay, so forget that. We'll just close that down. Okay. So why don't you guys spread out? We'll take a little stretch break, and